Are we ready for Jackie? Jackie! Okay, thank you. In January of 1978, I was 16 years old and set off on a journey. A friend of our family, her name was Stephanie, came to my house about 5 in the morning on a Thursday on a cold morning to pick me up for a long drive. We were going from my house in Springfield, Virginia, which is a sort of concrete suburb of Washington, D.C., and we were heading all the way up to Exeter, New Hampshire, because I was going to be enrolled at a very fancy boarding school called Phillips, Exeter. And the whole idea, oh gosh, you know it. The whole idea that somebody like me, middle-class kid from a just random place, was going to end up in this unbelievable place was already sort of overwhelming to me. But Stephanie and I were going to do this drive because my dad wasn't feeling well and wasn't up to the drive, and my mother needed to stay home and take care of my dad. So Stephanie volunteered for this long drive. So we started up I-95, get up to Exeter, and the whole way was just iconic New England town after beautiful New England town, and it was all fitting this image I had of this wonderful, magical place that I was going to. And it started to snow on the way and turned into something that later became known as the blizzard of 1978. But somehow, Stephanie and I and her little Dodge Dart, we somehow made it there, and of course I found the snow just magical and beautiful, and she was white-knuckled the whole way. But we got there, and it snowed some more overnight, and we stayed in our little hotel room at the Exeter Inn, and in the morning I looked out, and the snow had a little ice mixed into it, and it just sparkled. This beautiful blue sky and this bright sunlight. I remember thinking it was like little tiny crushed diamonds on the top of that snow, and I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and that I had come home. I somehow felt that I had come home. And Stephanie got me into my dorm and drove away, and there I was in January. I had to start at mid-year at the school, and I thought everything would be magical. But the next 2 weeks were really hard. I found I was really far behind the other kids academically, and I wasn't doing so well. And I started to feel like an imposter. And it just kept snowing and snowing and snowing. And I began to have a less romantic view of the snow. And then one day I got an English paper back and I got an A-. I thought, oh my gosh, maybe I really can do this. Maybe I'm not a total imposter. And that same day I got a message. There was a phone call from me from my brother who was 25. And so I had to go to my counselor's office and call him, and he said, you need to get home. Daddy's very sick. You need to get home. And we've got a plane ticket for you. Your teacher's going to take you to the airport. And I had seen enough movies about people being called home to a sick relative to assume that this meant that my father was going to die. And so I got on a plane, and on the plane the whole way I worked on my little speech about, why you should let me, go to the hospital and see him. And I got to the house, and everybody was standing around having coffee, and nobody was doing anything. And I finally said, when can we go see Daddy? And that's when they told me that he had died the night before. And they hadn't wanted to tell me, hundreds of miles away from home, surrounded by strangers. And so a long and painful mourning process began, but I had a second thing, of course, that I had to mourn, and that was that I was going to have to give up Exeter, because somebody needed to stay and help take care of my mother, and I was really the only one who could do that. My older brothers and sisters were all off all over the country, so I stayed. And I went back to that same public school that I had left with sort of a chip on my shoulder a couple months earlier, so it wasn't the best of times. And we got a late snowstorm in Virginia that year, and it came in March, and I rolled over and knew that meant, no school, hooray. But I could hear a scraping sound. My mother was out shoveling that snow, and I thought, oof, get out there, help your mother. So I put my coat on, I went outside, and she was just stabbing at that snow. I mean, she was mad at that snow. And I said, Mother, good God, what are you doing? And she said, this isn't right. I said, I know, it doesn't usually snow in March. And she said, no. This whole situation is not right. It's not right that your father's not here. And it's not right that you're here. He wanted you to be in Exeter. That's where you should be. It's selfish of me to have you here. So we talked about it, and eventually I agreed. We called the school, and they said, well, you could reapply. I reapplied, and miraculously I got in again. And that August, it was my mother driving me back up those long New England roads. And now it was a different kind of beautiful. It was green and verdant and fresh. And she was the one that said goodbye to me in the dorm and got me in my room and drove away. And as usual, through that whole winter, there was plenty of snow in New England, and once again, it made me feel like I was home. And to this day, it's the place that feels the most like home to me. And that year shaped everything that happened in my life after that, all for the good. And so what I learned out of that journey, first with Stephanie and then with my mother, is that we're all looking for that place that's home. And at the end of the day, we are all just driving each other home. Thank you.